Let's suppose I were to tell you that A pointed a loaded gun at B and pulled the trigger, killing B. What would you say A had done? Maybe you might think A committed murder. That'd be a natural tendency. After all, you hear that A pointed a loaded gun at B and pulled the trigger, killing him. What else could it be? But have I given you enough facts to conclude that it was murder? What if I add the following fact and say that A is defending his home against B, who's a deadly knife-wielding burglar? Now you might suspect that A's act of killing was done in self-defense or through some other lawful defense. Well, now let's suppose the fact that I add is that A is 4 years old and he got hold of his father's loaded gun, and in fooling around with the gun, he points at another person in the room. Maybe it's his friend B, or maybe it's his brother or his mother, and he pulls the trigger. Or maybe, as you first suspected, the fact that I add is that A is a hitman and he's just fulfilled a contract killing by killing B in cold blood. Any of those situations is possible. So where does that leave us? When I describe that A killed B, all I've described is the word homicide. A homicide's a killing of one human being by another. I say that homicide's a neutral term. We don't know if it's criminal yet. We only know that A has committed an act that may become criminal if there's a certain mens rea attached. It's kind of similar to hearing that A committed a taking and carrying away. Without knowing more, we can't say that the taking and carrying away has become the crime of larceny. We only know that A's committed an act of taking property away. Same here. Without any additional facts, we only know that A's committed a killing or a homicide when he loads, points a gun at B, pulls the trigger, and kills him. Homicide can be divided into three general groupings. There's justifiable homicide, excusable homicide, and criminal homicide. A justifiable homicide is one that's approved or sanctioned under the law. The law says that the killing was right under the circumstances, and consequently, there aren't going to be any criminal penalties from that act. Justifiable homicides occur where the actor uses deadly force as a lawful privilege in the following ways: in self-defense or in defense of another, where a defendant is preventing a dangerous crime from occurring, or where a defendant uses deadly force in apprehending a dangerous felon. Homicides are also justified in times of war or where the state executes one who's convicted. Excusable homicide's a little different. Yep, A has still killed B, but in an excusable homicide, the law says what A did wasn't right, but A is forgiven from criminal culpability. To have excusable homicide, we introduce the three I's: infancy, insanity, or involuntary intoxication. In our example, where A was 4 years old and he killed someone while playing with a loaded gun, his homicide is excused because of his age. That makes sense. It'd be wrong to hold that 4-year-old blameworthy. But at the same time, we can't slap the label of justifiable homicide on his act. We can't approve of his killing as a justifiable homicide. Insanity as a defense also makes a homicide excusable, at least theoretically. It serves as a fundamental premise in criminal law. Where could there possibly be blameworthiness if a defendant was unable to distinguish between right and wrong when he killed B? I say theoretically because juries are not really quick to endorse defendant's insanity claim, even when the experts say that the defendant's insane. The case of Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children in a postpartum psychotic break, is a perfect example of this statement. She was charged with capital murder. And even though experts lined up to say that she had had a psychotic break, the first jury to hear her case convicted her. Headlines sprang up around the country. Insane, but who cares? 5 children are dead. She should pay that price. But because of errors at the first trial, she was retried. And on retrial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity, an excusable homicide. She remains hospitalized years later for these crimes. Finally, similar to insanity is our third I. That's the concept of involuntary intoxication. That's where, through no blame of defendant, he's become involuntarily intoxicated. Perhaps someone has laced his food or drink with a drug, puts him in a mental state actually similar to insanity. All of these represent excusable homicides, homicides that are forgiven under the law.